And the title of the talk was originally going to be something about Britain's clandestine LSD labs, but I've changed it somewhat because I realised that I couldn't pack as much in 30 minutes in my post-stroke state. So now I've changed it, and it's called The Strange Case of Victor Kapur, and it's more about how LSD began its inexorable rise in Britain in the mid-60s, and the story of one particular LSD lab, which is the first known British clandestine LSD laboratory. And it's a story which has an interesting twist, as I hope we'll see. So, firstly, let's take a quick look at where people in Britain were getting their acid from before the Microdot deluge of the early 70s. Recreational acid use in Britain prior to 1965 was very low, and I'd estimate that fewer than a few hundred people were using acid in Britain. And that was only really due to the problem's availability, because the demand was certainly there. People were reading about it from stories in America and thinking they all wanted to try this new drug. So some people were sourcing it from, very small amounts were being leaked out from the psychotherapeutic establishment. There were over 20 hospitals and doctors in Britain that were using LSD in psychotherapy, and some of them were giving it quite happily to their friends because it wasn't illegal to do so at that time. Some was being brought in from America by the likes of Michael Hollingshead, whose acid was then being distributed by Alex Trocchi or Brian Barrett, both of them acid evangelists. The first LSD lab in America, illicit LSD in a lab in America, was in operation by 1962, but it's unlikely for any was coming from there. And the drug, it wasn't subject to proper controls until 1966. Prior to 1966, it was only subject to the Poisons Act, and it was still possible to obtain it over the counter at many chemists with a fraudulent prescription. And the fantasy author Michael Moorcock, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, remembers buying it in London from a chemist called John Bell and Croydon's in Wigmore Street, and many other people did the same. Or it could be even easily obtained by just sending a cheque to one of the British chemical suppliers who sold it. And the key person here was a guy called Charles Druce, who had established an arrangement with a Czechoslovakian company to import manufactured LSD, and he set up an international mail order business. Druce was also, a few years later, involved with Ron Stark, and almost had a hit taken out on him when he failed to fulfill a promise to deliver ergotamine. This is another area of British history which needs much further investigation. And an interesting aside here is that Charles Druce was also supplying acid to Koch-Light laboratories, who were distributing it to China. And Druce's colleague Ronald Craze notes in his memoir that he personally sold a kilo of LSD to China in 1965 at £350 a gram. So I wonder what the Chinese were doing with all that acid in the 60s. Druce is a very interesting character in early British acid history. He was also supplying Leary with acid in the early 60s, often delivering it in person to Millbrook, yet another area which needs much further investigation. But by the mid-60s, demand for LSD was soaring. Sandoz had ceased producing it, and the police were cracking down on the burgeoning acid culture, driven by some hysterical and inaccurate reports in the tabloid press. Even Morning Glory seeds were banned for several months because you could extract LSA, I think, from Morning Glory seeds. So it was inevitable that LSD labs would emerge in Britain, and that's the story I'm going to tell you now. Now, as acid heads, and I'm sure we all are, you certainly are, sir, I can tell. I'm sure we'd all like to believe that Britain's first clandestine acid lab was set up by a misty-eyed acid alchemist and evangelist, possibly looking like that, because that's what all acid alchemists look like, as we know. Determined to turn on the youth of Britain and undermine capitalism by creating some righteous LSD. Sadly, that wasn't the case, and far from it, as we'll see. 1966 was a pivotal year in British psychedelic history. In early 1966, the police in London were becoming aware of an increase in arrests for possession and dealing of LSD, mainly through the dodgy activities of Michael Hollingshead and his World Psychedelic Centre in Chelsea. This awareness had also been fuelled largely by scare stories in the media, but generally speaking, acid heads were keeping the secret of this fantastic new drug to themselves, largely confining it to private parties or gigs. There were few, if any, public freakouts, and few police officers actually knew what LSD looked like. it being colourless and odourless, and in its main distribution forms of blotting paper, vials of liquid, or the acid soaked on sugar cubes, it wasn't particularly obvious and was quite easy to dispose of in the event of a bust or a search. Nonetheless, the heat was beginning to come down on LSD users, and the Metropolitan Police's ever-growing numbers of informants began to inform on the LSD scene. A clandestine LSD laboratory was operating in London, and it first came to the police's attention in the spring of 1966. One police document noting that the information came from, quote, two sources, neither inconclusive. So you could tell that was from an informant just by how they phrased it. The large quantities of a drug known as lysergic acid diethylamide was being manufactured by a chemist in the North London area, a hotbed of drug takers. That lab was operated by a guy called Victor James Kapur, and this is the story of his lab, and also how a chance discovery in a book turned the whole thing on its head. There are several routes into the story of Kapur's lab, and the obvious one would be to tell it chronologically via newspaper reports and police files. But good stories don't work like that, so in order to hopefully make it more interesting and get a better idea of the impact of this LSD lab, we have to go back to, if I can find him, not that guy, that's not a person. So this guy, anyone know who he is? Well, that's good. It's always better when people don't know. It's a guy called Terry Taylor, a relatively obscure but key character from the early days of British counterculture. Author Colin McInnes based characters in his 1950s novels Absolute Beginners and Mr. Love and Justice on Taylor, who also enjoyed notoriety as photographer Ida Kay's lover. Taylor, who also goes by the name of John Allen, was a bohemian traveller and author of Baron's Court All Change in 1961, one of Britain's few authentic beatnik novels and only the second British novel to mention LSD by name. Taylor moved to Tangier for a while during the early 60s to work on a follow-up to Baron's Court, becoming friends with William Burroughs, and he was an enthusiastic and skilled user of keef, a Moroccan preparation of marijuana. Whilst in Tangier, Taylor became involved with a group of Berber tribesmen who practiced a kind of magic using keef and Majoum cookies to attain an altered state of consciousness during which they materialised thought forms. The polymath poet Johnny Dolphin, have I got his slide? No, I haven't got Johnny Dolphin's slide. Took part in some of these drug-fueled rituals, recalling, quote, each one would concentrate, projecting his inner scene. The one with the most power would make the scene that would take over the night in the magic room. Terry, lean, deft and poised, prepared the keef. Then he would pass out the Majoum cookies. Basically, they were bringing thought forms to materialisation for those high enough to see them. Taylor quickly realised drugs, psychedelic drugs in particular, were an ideal way to attain group and individual gnosis. And on his return to London in the mid-60s, he reconvened his magic group, but now with a number of polydrug users, including an old friend from the 1950s, a woman called Bernadette, or Detta, Wybrow. Wybrow was now a high-class prostitute, and among her clientele she had a customer who happened to be a chemist. At first, Taylor thought Wybrow had gone crazy when she told him she had a John who could make LSD, but quickly saw this as the perfect opportunity to obtain LSD for use in his magical practices and also for fun and profit. Just how the chemist, Victor James Kapur, who ran a dispensing chemist shop in New North Road, Islington, was persuaded to make LSD is a melange of fact, speculation and mythology, and the exact details will probably never known. However, multimedia artist and author Stuart Home, who has done considerable research into Taylor and his associates because of their connections with his deceased mother, wrote, quote, I've been told that through a combination of her charms and various weird rituals, this boffin was persuaded to make acid. Well, perhaps, but a more likely reason was the large sums of easy money to be made from LSD manufacture with, so they thought, very little risk of detection. But there was perhaps an even more compelling for Kapur to do Wybrow's bidding, blackmail. When the police eventually raided one of Kapur's laboratories, they found, quote, a large quantity of indecent photographs, negatives portraying Kapur with women, one of whom could be clearly identified as Bernadette Wybrow. Exactly when Kapur began manufacturing LSD for Wybrow and Taylor is unclear. Terry Taylor's narrative suggests it was already in operation by late 64 or early 65. The police, though, could only find evidence linking Kapur to the purchase of chemicals required for making LSD to late 1966, shortly after it had been outlawed in Britain. It's not known either what formula and method Kapur used to make his LSD, but according to Stuart Holmes' interviewees, quote, the acid is said to have been very pure and an intense stripping scene developed, as well as much street dealing. Now, another way into this case comes via Scotland Yard's drug squad, who were first alerted to this possibility of the illicit lab in mid-1967, when the FBI in America suggested to them that large quantities of LSD were being smuggled from Britain to the USA. Now, just how the new FBI knew this to be the case is unclear. It may have been information received from informants, analysis of seized drugs, or a combination of the two. And as we'll see later, one of the key players in Kapur's manufacturing and distribution conspiracy had very close links with USA intelligence agencies, and this was almost certainly a factor. As I said, one police document noted the information came from two sources, neither inconclusive, that large quantities of a drug known as lysergic acid diethylamide was being manufactured by a chemist in the North London area. Such specific information indicated that the information had come from an informant. Media sources suggested that a 50-strong special team of police and customs officers were formulated to catch the gang. So now I think the fact that the police were prepared to invest such an intensity of resources to smash an LSD manufacturing and distribution rig in 1966 or 67, pardon me, is perhaps indicative of just how fearful the British establishment was of LSD's potential to change the trajectory of the lives of individuals and thus potentially of society. On 27th of September 1967, this team of police and customs officers working on the case made a breakthrough when 31-year-old socialite Alexander Davison, son of Lord Bruchane and a company director and barrister, was arrested at London. London Airport, there we go. As he tried to board a plane to New York, a search revealed Davison to be carrying a tin of Yardley's talcum powder, inside which there were 3 condoms, one wrapping the other, and in the third condom, the customs officers found 10 grams of pure LSD crystals. Davison initially said little, claiming that the tin of talcum powder had been given to him some weeks earlier by a friend in California, but when an eagle-eyed customs officer spotted the English price sticker of 5 shillings and 9pence on the tin, Davison was at a loss to explain this anomaly. Bit of a rookie mistake there. He claimed he was going to America to carry out research into potato processing and denied he had anything to do with the LSD. He later said, "I realise what a fool I've been," but still insisted he was innocent and reserved his defence. His trial was set for 1st of... this clicker's crap. You have to point it at the thing. That's not very technological, is it? That's another cut-in. His trial was set for 1st of November 1967, and he was released on a bail surety of $33,600, which was one of the highest bail amounts ever in London for a London drug case. Now, some sources claimed police and customs officers stopped Bruchane because he only had a one-way ticket and £24 in cash. And that could have been true, but it's just as likely, considering the FBI and Scotland Yard was aware LSD was made in London and smuggled to the USA, that some of the police's 50-strong team had airports under surveillance looking for named suspects as well as suspicious behaviours. The Metropolitan Police file, hereafter MIPO, dealing with Kapur's laboratories, and doesn't mention a direct link between Davison's arrest and Kapur's, but media reports from Kapur's trial suggests Bruchane may have offered information about Kapur or had material linking him to Kapur. The Daily Mail, for instance, wrote, police checked further and in inquiries closed in on Kapur's shop in New North Road, Islington, even though it's actually in Camden, I think. It does seem odd that if Bruchane was an informer, he was released out on bail, thus putting him in a position where he could easily alert Kapur and his associates. Equally odd that his arrest didn't alert their suspicions. Anyway, notwithstanding that anomaly, Kapur was placed under increasingly close and constant observation by police. Intense surveillance of Kapur and his associates appears to have begun, or at least was first recorded on the 2nd of October, when officers from HM Customs and Excise Investigation Branch went to the Samuel Whitbread pub in Leicester Square. This is a large modern pub, it's now a Burger King, named after the brewery's founder, with a dive bar in the basement called the Zodiac Bar, and various dining rooms on the upper floors. At 1:35 that day, the customs officers observed Kapur arrive in his distinctive maroon Jaguar car, and those were the days when you could actually park in Leicester Square. He got out, went into the Zodiac Bar, looked around and went downstairs before re-entering the Zodiac Bar, where he was shortly joined by a man known to the police as Harry Nathan, an important name to remember. The pair spent some time in conversation before Nathan handed a package to Kapur, who put it inside his jacket pocket, which they thought was cash. After they left the pub, and after that they left the pub and drove off separately, believed to be a payment from Nathan for LSD previously supplied by Kapur. No arrests were made at that time, as the combined customs and police investigation team wanted to catch as many of the conspirators as possible, as well as being certain they could link any LSD linked seized with those involved in its manufacture, sale or possession. The guy Kapur was distributing his acid to was, as I said, Harry Nathan, so bear that name in mind as it becomes relevant later on. Satisfied they had identified who Kapur was selling at least some of his LSD to, police surveillance increased, with this team of 30 officers doing round-the-clock surveillance on anyone connected to Kapur, and this included the notorious and infamous Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher. The number of police officers involved, as I said before, strongly suggests that information had been given to them by informers, because there were about 12 people who were watching all the time. There are no further records of Customs House police surveillance until Thursday, 9th of November, when surveillance on Kapur and others was stepped up, and they were followed by a team of undercover officers to various locations and to various individuals, all of which would become crucial to the prosecution's case. The media reported this breathlessly in retrospect as policemen, some wearing dirty jeans, pullovers and anoraks, and miniskirted policewomen, all disguised as layabouts, joined the probe. Their only protection was their hidden warrant cards, so just be careful when you're near police in case they get the hidden warrant card out. After a few more days of conducting surveillance on Kapur, which led the police were led to believe a major LSD production was either due or had actually just been completed, so they decided to strike on the 12th of November, which was a Saturday. By the late morning of 12th of November, London's Leicester Square was crawling with numerous undercover police officers, all observing the Samuel Whitbread pub. Some were on foot, mingling with the crowds or sat in cafes, while others were in unmarked police cars. At 11:45 a.m, DC Spears and WDC Liston met Pilcher, and almost certainly they saw Harry Nathan arrive. He parked his car on the east side of the square. The officers went into the Zodiac Bar of the Samuel Whitbread pub, where they had previously seen Kapur meet Nathan. At 12:15, Nathan entered the pub, bought a drink and stood looking out of the window. Kapur then arrived, entered the bar and went over to Nathan. And after a few moments, WDC Liston noticed Kapur passing Nathan a package, which he put in his inside pocket of his jacket. And she told DC Pilcher what she had seen. Kapur and Nathan conversed for a few minutes before Kapur left the bar, with Liston following them. Nathan left the bar a few minutes later, followed by DS Pilcher. Pilcher followed Nathan across Leicester Square and apprehended him as he unlocked his car, saying, "I am a police officer, stand still and put your hands above your head." Nathan responded, "All right, please don't embarrass me." Pilcher told Nathan he had seen Kapur hand him a package, but Nathan denied it. He was searched, and in his left jacket pocket, Pilcher found a bundle of tissues in which was wrapped a contraceptive containing a powder. Pilcher said, "I believe this is LSD, where do you get it?" To which Nathan replied, "All right, you obviously know. You know, don't you? I can say no more." Nathan was arrested and taken to West End Central Police Station. 10 minutes, right, yeah, I think that's all right. Possibly. Spears and Liston followed Kapur out of the Zodiac Bar and arrested him as he was trying to get into his car. Told him that they'd been watching him and that he believed he'd handed drugs to Harry Nathan. Kapur visibly blanched and said, "Oh no, how could he have known about it?" He too was taken to West End Central Police Station. Kapur's Jaguar and the Mini were searched, and they found more LSD crystals. They went to Kapur's shop in New North Road in Camden, and a search of the premises revealed a laboratory set up with the equipment consistent with the manufacture of LSD. Photographs were taken of the laboratory, which may or may not be there. No, that's just some newspaper clippings from the time. Another LSD lab was also found in the garage of one of Kapur's relatives, who claimed he only rented the garage to Kapur and had no knowledge of his illegal activities. Presumably, Kapur created this second laboratory to increase his production of LSD by having two processes going at the same time. At 3 o'clock on the same Saturday, two police officers went to Harry Nathan's flat in Richmond Court with a warrant to search the premises. Nathan's wife answered, and through the open door, they could see a man who said he was Mr. Al Cooper. Cooper demanded to see the warrant, after which the police spent 3 hours searching the premises, finding various tablets and bits of acid. The name Al Cooper is significant. This name was significant, but he was not arrested or questioned. This begs the question: was Al Cooper waiting to pick up acid from Harry Nathan following his meeting with Kapur? And it's at this point that the case of Kapur begins to get weird, if not totally unbelievable. I did some research and discovered that Al Cooper was in fact Alan Bruce Cooper, a name that will mean absolutely nothing to the people interested in the history of psychedelic drugs, but a great deal to students of the Cray twins and organised crime in Britain. Alan Cooper and Harry Nathan were linked by marriage, Alan Cooper being Nathan's son-in-law, and it was Cooper's Austin Mini car that Nathan had been using throughout the time police had him under surveillance. When Kapur was interviewed later that evening, he broke down and refused to say anything, claiming he was too scared to say anything. Well, if you'd been involved with the craze, you would be, wouldn't you? In case you got a visit from Spiny Norman. In 1967, there was no specific law regarding the manufacture of LSD, and Section 2 of the 1964 Misuse of Drugs Act meant that as a pharmaceutical chemist, Kapur was authorised to keep LSD and so could not be charged with possessing or making the drug. However, by supplying individuals, he had breached the 1966's poison rules, which state, "It shall not be lawful to sell or supply LSD to a person who is not a doctor, public analyst, or in charge of an institute or place of learning." They went through Kapur's paperwork and discovered he'd been buying ergotoxin, a key ingredient for LSD, since 22nd of September 1966 from a merchant in Herefordshire, who in turn was getting it from Hamburg. And again, that was perfectly legal to import. The chemical supplier gave evidence that his company had supplied Kapur with over 6,500 grams of ergotoxin up to the date of his arrest, and the police scientific officer estimated this was enough to make at least 15,000 grams of LSD with a street value of £11 million. When they checked Kapur's bank account, he had absolutely nothing in it, suggesting that he wasn't getting paid much at all. 5 minutes. Yeah, I can do 5 minutes. I'm just trying to get to the bit. On 16th of May 1968, Kapur, together with 4 other defendants, appeared in the Central Criminal Courts of the Old Bailey. All 5 were accused of conspiracy to contravene the 1964 Drugs Act and other offences relating to LSD. Kapur pleaded guilty to the conspiracy charge and to possessing to dangerous drugs. The other defendants pleaded not guilty. So Kapur's sentencing was postponed until the end of their trial, and he was still held in custody until that date. On 31st of May, they all appeared again for sentencing, and Kapur got 9 years. And the judge made this statement to the court: "There can be no more hellish occupation than the manufacture of drugs, LSD, for widespread distribution, with all the dangerous consequences to the health and character of those who indulge in it. I have to indicate by the sentences I pass the sense of horror which decent people feel, as well as the dangers to others who might be tempted to follow in their footsteps." Kapur cried as his sentence was read out. None of them offered any form of defence for their actions, again, probably because of the Cray twins' involvement. It was also revealed that during the investigations, several bottles of hydrogen hydrate had exploded in police cells. Now, as we all know, probably, hydrogen hydrate is one of the chemicals used in in one process of LSD manufacture, presumably the one that Kapur followed, and it would also become critical many years later in the police's quest to track down the Microdot Gang. I'm trying to get to the best bit. Detta Wybrow appeared in court and she got off with a very light sentence indeed. Now that again suggests she was one of the informers in the first place. And she was said in court the police said, it is known that Wybrow sells LSD to the artist beatnik type of person and to Americans. She got a 2-year probation order basically. Trying to get to the best bit for the last bit. Anyway, if you recall that Harry Nathan and Al Cooper's names, Al Cooper then in July 1968, when the Cray twins were going through their trial, appeared in court, and some of the newspapers ran stories like Cray case witness in US Secret Service. And it turned out that Alan Bruce Cooper, who was a well-known London criminal in the mid-60s, was a very close confidant of the Crays, and he was supplying them with machine guns, pistols, explosives, exploding suitcases, and a variety of other weapons that were used to kill people. Now, when Cooper was arrested, he basically told Norman Pilcher that he should get in touch with John Durrose, the head of Scotland Yard. He said, if you contact John Durrose, he will tell you I am his informant. And Durrose told Reed that he'd been in contact with Cooper for a number of years, but argued he was not an informant as such. But that meant that Nipper now had enough evidence to arrest the Cray twins and could call Cooper to the witness box. Cooper was questioned by several members of the Cray's defence team, all of whom attempted to demonstrate that Cooper was a criminal and therefore an unreliable evidence. But basically, what had happened was the Americans had intercepted a shipment of LSD which had been manufactured in Marseille, and that had been sent by another person called Nathan, who they believed was connected to Harry Nathan. So that's how they got on the trail of the Kapur thing in the first place. And basically Bruce Cooper was turned to act as an informant for the police, and he was working in deep cover in the Cray establishment and passing information back on. His information wasn't used in court in the end because they thought it was too fantastic. There's also a plot to kill the Pope that the Crays had conjured up, which nobody wanted to hear about. So the point that I'm trying to make here, very badly I'm afraid, is that Scotland Yard and the American Bureau of Drugs were clearly aware of the burgeoning LSD trade in the mid-60s and who was making it, begging the question to what depth they have been involved in subsequent acid labs. And it's quite ironic that were it not for Alan Bruce Cooper and LSD, the Crays may never have been arrested and put on trial for their various murders and crimes. And let me finish in paragraph because it says stop. Is Kapur's clandestine LSD lab might have been Britain's first in Britain, but it certainly wasn't the last. And in the research for my next book, I've already discovered 20 other British clandestine LSD labs, and I'm on the trail of many more. Thank you very much.